welcome. My name is Christian Fornesbeck. I'm CEO of Leverage. So we're here today to talk about, or at least for the next 45 minutes, to talk about IP building and brand building. And since you've found your way in here, I assume that you don't think that that just means better ads somewhere on the internet. Because the IP and the brand that you own is basically the core of your business if you're trying to build a business. If you're an artist, then your IP and your brand is probably you. But if you're trying to build a game developer that lasts for years and makes more than one game and perhaps actually grows, then you need to think about these things. And I know from experience that this is the resting state of a game developer. This is how we spend our nights. This is how we spend many of our days, wondering whether the next game will fail. Because, you know, there's so many games coming out, we really honestly don't know. We can do the best we can even make a brilliant game, but it can still fail. And it took me a long time to learn this. And the problem is that no matter how passionate we are about these things, the laws of business don't go away. And we're firing our passion into the void. And at some point, at least for me, and I made 35 game projects in my own companies, you get to the point where you think, I want this. I want what the AAA games have. I want that recognizability. I want the fact that you look at them and you think, hey, this is a quality package. What you want, or what I wanted, was sustainability. And the constant sort of running away from the randomness of success was just wearing me down. And I think it works like that for a lot of people. So the question is how, and that's what I'm going to talk about for the next 40 minutes. So I'm going to go briefly into who am I, and how have I learned these things. Quite quickly through the tough basics about the whole game developer thing, and then into how do we build a lasting IP, and how do we build a brand around it that people will actually notice and come back to. So for me, I've been in the games business since 2001. I played computer games on Amigas and all those things. I even had a Commodore 64. I played role-playing games till my fingers bled. I made short films. I did all kinds of creative stuff, and most of it game-oriented. And then I bootstrapped my way to making 35 game projects, entertainment projects, advertising games, learning games. And I spent years making my personal dream project, $1 million budget, Hollywood stars, Steam game. And then basically winning prizes and sustaining the business just barely, I started wanting what the AAA developers have. And my response at that point in my life was to say, okay, I'm going to consult. So I'm still a consultant for DDM, so basically helping game companies to build IPs. But I spent the last 3 years being head of IP development for Nordic Film Games. It's a weird name, but they're the investment arm of Egmont, which is a Nordic media conglomerate with 6,000 employees. And as head of IP development, the project was, how do we take these games that we're investing in and make them sustainable? How do we make the IP, the intellectual property, into something that lasts? And you quickly hit, I think we invested $140 million in these 6 companies, so it's a serious business. And you quickly hit the realization that all of the top-selling games are sequels. It's tough, but it's true, right? Whether it's on mobile or it's on PC or console, all the top-selling games are sequels. They're all part of established brands that you recognize and you instantly emotionally react to. In fact, it's so bad that it recently came out that even a failed sequel will sell more than a successful new game. It's that bad. Or it's that good if you're the owner of a brand or an IP. And that's basically what we discovered, is that all of the companies we invest in, and basically the whole middle tier of independent game development, is not looking at these two things. We're not looking at building IPs that last. We just want to make a game. And we're not building brands around those IPs that will actually catch the market, because we're so invested in the games we make that we think other people see the game in the same way that we see it. But that's not how it works. The rest of the world doesn't know our game. So when they see it for the first time, they literally see exactly what you show them. And if you haven't built the brand so that it communicates instantly, they don't get it and they move on to the next thing. So that was Who Am I? So in order to get to the whole IP and brand building thing, you have to have the basics down. So just quickly, you need, of course, to have business and creativity balanced. Being a totally creatively controlled company means it's an art studio. And that's tough to build, grow, sustain. It can be done if you're rich or lucky or absolutely brilliant. And you probably have to be all three, let's face it. But everybody else has to balance these two things. And if they're not balanced in the company, you should probably look at it. Don't do this. I've done it. It doesn't work. Business development on the game after it's finished, But don't worry, indies in every medium do this. It's the same with movies and books and so on. But the problem with games is we have employees. So I really advise doing the business development before building the game. Please do have a long-term goal, a strategy, and a plan to get there. For an investor, not having that is a red flag the size of Nebraska. Prove that it works. Don't come and say this is going to be a great game if you're talking to an investor, for example. Show them the numbers. It's a great game. Look, people like it. And build your audience every day. Don't expect the publishers to save you. Those days are over. If you're not building an audience already, the publisher's reaction is that they're pouring money into a black hole. What the publisher wants is, this is growing, we can make it grow more. So if your game doesn't allow that, I would say back to the drawing board. And above all, and this can make all the other basics go away, if you can get this to work, forget the other three things I said. If your game keeps people attention and it spreads itself, you have a business. We'll figure out how to earn money on it later. So if you're conceptualizing a prototype where you can't prove this until you have $1 million in the bank, reconceptualize. That's my best advice. So let's get to the IP. So IPs are intellectual properties. So what we're talking about here is the ownable part of creativity, not technology, but creativity. And it's important to say that awareness is not an IP. So the fact that a lot of people know about you does not mean that you have a valuable IP. King, for example, has Candy Crush. This, what are they, 2 billion players or something like that? But it's not an IP. What IPs have is that they're unique and protectable. So from a creative viewpoint, there's nothing else like it, and you could actually get a lawyer to pinpoint what makes it what it is. And if you can't do that, if you're making a generic knight or a generic whatever, and there's nothing that really makes it different from the other knights, then it's not unique and it's not protectable. There has to be an emotional connection. An IP is about something that people have invested their feelings in. Lara Croft, Harry Potter, Spider-Man, E.T., whatever. They're very emotional. And then they're effectively positioned and communicated. And that's the brand. That's the fact that this project is not exactly like something else. It does something that nobody else does. And is positioned in the market, above it, below it, to the left, to the east, whatever. You can make up your own axes, but they have to work. When you're successful with an IP, then you have the opportunity to make more games on the same IP. And of course, that's bleeding obvious. But you can also, if you have a, how should I say, a real IP, you can actually cross it over into other media. And you may think that that doesn't matter until 10 years from now. And it won't matter until I have success. And that's actually true. The IP and the crossover part, in my opinion at least, doesn't kick in until you have massive success. And then it makes the massive success even bigger. But the investor is thinking ahead. And the publisher is thinking ahead. So if you're pitching a game and trying to get an investment or trying to get a publisher, then they're already thinking 10 years down the line. Can this become a sustainable series of games? Can it become ultimately an entertainment property that Netflix will broadcast and we can sell merchandise and all those things? So it may not be important the first 6 months or 12 months or 24 months when your game goes online and in early access. But your partners are thinking ahead. So your likelihood of getting the money to make the success is actually quite dependent on this. So that brings us to the question, what is it these IPs do? What is it that makes them valuable? And I think it's this. I think what makes an IP valuable is that we prefer things we already have an emotional connection with. And you'll notice it, if you're browsing music or books, or if you go into a bookstore, you automatically pick out the stuff you know, the authors you know, the series you know, and so on. This is what friends are, right? You look into a crowd and you instantly pick out your friends. And they're much more interesting than everybody else, and they mean something to you, and there's an emotional history, and there's all that stuff. That's what an IP is. It's looking into a crowd of products and saying, that's my friend. And that's an enormous value. You know all about conversion rates and so on. So just the fact that you're 20 microseconds ahead and more likely to be clicked on is a huge advantage. And the investors know this, and the publishers know this, and Netflix knows it. That's why Netflix is willing right now to invest in game properties. It's because millions of players have emotional relationships with these characters. The thing that defines it then is that it can be legally protected. So what is protectable is the specific design of the character, for example, or the specific storyline. So Harry Potter's storyline is protectable, and the design of Spider-Man's suit is protectable. This is simple stuff, but it's worth remembering. So if you do go hardcore and make a game about triangles and squares, it's not protectable. And your investor is thinking that too, If by chance this gets 1 million or 1 billion fans, do we actually own it, or can other people do the same thing without there being a price? So that's the first thing. It needs to be unique and protectable. Then there's that emotional connection. What is that? So actually it's, as I see it, it's having a universal emotional journey. And it doesn't necessarily mean story, but it means that the journey you take and the emotions you experience, you own that. You can repeat it. This is why U2 has been making the same record for 20 years, right? You're buying the same experience again. Every time you go to see a Spider-Man movie or play a Spider-Man game, you're taking the same journey through adolescence. Growing pains, balancing work and family and girlfriends and new powers and all those things. It's the same story every time. Lara Croft is reliving the hunt for her father in the ruins every time, in the movie, in the game number 19, whatever. Hitman, same emotional journey every time. But preferably, it's one you can own. So you can see it with Harry Potter. We've got this arriving in school or arriving in a new class, and it's a story about bullying. And the bullying gets worse and worse for each volume, but it's still a story about bullying. Ultimately, it's a tyrant who's bullying a whole society, but it's the same emotional journey. And you need to think about that. And that's where the hero of this story comes in, and it's this. And people are sometimes surprised because we're looking at this quite commercially. We're looking at this, can we make money with what you're doing? Can we take this product, which is a product, and make it even more commercial and multiply it into other media, into merchandise and all that. But this is the core of it. So when we're looking at building IPs and building at brands, actually the first thing we do is not to look forward, it's to go back. What was the original artistic intent that the people who made this put into it? Why did you make this game? What are you trying to say? And then you can amplify it. And one of the ways you can amplify it, of course, is to have a character. And if you think about it, all the major IPs are character-based. So if you think about Pokemon, if you think about Spider-Man, if you think about Zelda, Super Mario, Pac-Man, whatever, there's always a character. So, and there's usually just one main character that is the brand. And then there are secondary characters around them. Lara Croft, Hitman, and so on. Even Bloodborne, where you can design your own game, your own character and so on, that's the character we recognize every time. If they go out and make a movie, he's going to look like that. Because that's become the brand and the IP. And this is really important. So if you're designing a game, think of Shovel Knight. It doesn't have to be high budgets or anything like that. It has to be unique and recognizable. And the terrible thing is that just like kids, these IPs grow up really fast. So if it's a success, there comes a point when it's too late. You can't reverse engineer characters into something that has 1 billion fans already. That's King's problem. It's that Candy Crush, no matter how popular it is just never going to be about a character, even though they're trying to squeeze it into, and they're making episodes and they're doing all kinds of things. It's just not there. And I happen to know that King is now investing hundreds of millions of euros into building brands into their new games and IPs into their new games because they've hit the ceiling. They've realized that all they have is awareness. They don't have an emotional relationship. So the IP is a really important part of it. And the second really important part is the impactful brand. So what's the difference? Well, I'm from Denmark. In Denmark we made Hitman, or some people in Denmark made Hitman. I wasn't one of them, although I know quite a few of them. And IO Interactive, who made Hitman, have prospered for 20 years. And they recently did a management buyout, bought the whole thing back from Square Enix, and they're now independent again. And it's still Hitman. So what they've had for 20 years is this IP about this meticulous killer power dream and the organization around it and all his back history of clones and so on. But what they've also done is they've built a brand around it. And the difference is that if you think about Harry Potter, for example, then the original book, Harry Potter, that's an IP. It's a character, it's a complicated emotional landscape, it's ownable. But the brand doesn't really arrive until the movies about Harry Potter arrives. That's when they start to build around it, the logo, the way the character looks, the colors, the way they compose the posters and so on. So you recognize it like that every time you see it. And that's what these guys managed to do. And what they realized that a lot of us, including myself, have struggled with is that nobody can see inside our dream. The problem is that we get so close to our products that we think that everybody else can see the same thing. And it's like this internet bubble or filter bubble or whatever you say. We get locked into this circle of friends and friendly journalists and so on who know what we're talking about. And then we think the rest of the market sees it the same way. And then we put it on Steam and then it drops like a rock because nobody knows what the fuck we're talking about. They've never seen it before, and it doesn't look like a complete package. It just looks like a screenshot. I've had endless conversations with game developers who said, well, we'll just put up a screenshot. We have some really nice screenshots. And the problem is that when you're doing that, you're assuming that the things you see in the screenshot mean the same to a stranger. But they don't, because when you look at the ship, if it's a spaceship, You're seeing the way it's been upgraded and the journey it took to get there and the universe around it and all the options you have for where you're going to fly and how much it costs to refuel and how vulnerable it is, how powerful those guns are and all that. All that is just internalized for you because you've been working with it for years. But to somebody who's a complete stranger, who's not this product's friend, it's just a fucking spaceship. And there are thousands of spaceships coming out every day. So what makes it special? No, people just can't see inside this dream. And that's a tough one. That's also why the whole balancing of business and creativity is so important. Because once, I don't know if it works in English, but the Swedes, or is it the Norwegians, have a saying that you can't see the forest if you're too close to the trees. Or is it the other way around? You can't see the trees if you're too close to the forest. I can never figure it out. But I think the point is, if you're too close, it's just a green mass, right? Or maybe you get really fascinated with this leaf because it's a really cool leaf. But to a stranger, they're looking at the whole forest. So it's a completely different thing. And if you can build this in, if you can make it so that people recognize your game, your IP, your universe at a glance, then it's so valuable that it actually changes the balance sheet of the company. So it's not just, hey, let's make something cool looking, or let's make something that people click on faster. The investors will actually say, okay, so, right, what's the value of this company? Well, you've got 20 really good employees, and they love being here, so there's a value. You've got these 3 technologies. Do you have any IPs? No, we have circles and squares and some medieval knights that look like other medieval knights. Right, okay, so no IP. Okay, that's fine. The next company has a medieval knight, but he's got weird feathers sticking out, so everybody recognizes him instantly. Win for them. So when we come to this whole, I want what AAA has, we have to think about what do the AAA companies do to get this. And the knee-jerk reaction, of course, is they pour money on it, which is not completely untrue. They do pour money on it. But they pour money on some quite specific things. One of the things they pour money on is strategy. And strategy is basically about how do we want this brand and this IP what do we want to do with it? Where do we want it to go? Which customers do we want to engage with this? How do we want to position ourselves in relation to our competitors? If we're doing a shooter, are we so close to Call of Duty that people have to choose between us and Call of Duty? Because we're going to get steamrolled if that's the thing. Can we maybe change both some of the visualization, maybe even some of the game, so that we're positioned differently from Call of Duty or whatever else we're competing with? And this whole thing for us in the games industry, we're often quite engineering focused, right? We're out of an engineering tradition, even though we're creative and we're very artistic, there's no doubt about that. But we have a tendency to say that strategy is fluff. You know, it's just air, it's bullshit. It doesn't mean anything, it's not a product. But strategy is planning, right? That's a little bit like saying an army doesn't need a strategy. What we need is tanks. Just send them forward, that'll do. But actually having a plan for where to put the tanks and where the rivers are and where we expect to meet the enemy, that's quite important. And for building an IP and building a brand, it's even more important. The second thing that the AAAs pour money into is IP and brand specialists. So one of the conversations I'm having again and again is that game developers, in Leverage we're talking to game developers between 30 and 150 employees mainly, will let our concept artists do it. I hear that once a week. Our concept artist can do it, he makes really great illustrations. But the problem is that an illustration is not a brand building key visual. It's just a different skill set. And bringing in exactly the right person with exactly the specialty of making the kind of illustration that exactly this audience enjoys and that fulfills the strategy we have of exposing these 3 USPs in this way with this emotional tone is just very, very specific. And the fact that, or you know, the knee-jerk reaction of just getting the closest concept artist to do it is basically shooting yourself in the foot. So, what do these brand visuals do when they work? Well, when they work, they position everything about the game to engage the right customers. So it's not just this is cool, it's this is cool for these specific customers. And the trick in the process, of course, is to go back to the original artistic intent, why we made the game, and then build a strategy for how do we get that to work to hit this specific audience with these specific USPs and own that space in the market, and then get it illustrated, not just one illustration, but across the whole brand. And what it then does when it works is that it engages the customers with personality and emotion. And personality is a really important word here. Brands are a lot like characters. They have personalities. And we worked with the same illustration bureau that did this for God of War. And it won't surprise you, or maybe it will, that Kratos looks a hell of a lot like the lead artist in that illustration bureau. He's actually bald. He's Danish, so he's a Viking. He has a really big beard, and he's quite muscular. So I'm not saying it's like that all the time, but I'm just saying that this is the right illustrator for this project. He's also fucking brilliant, but that's another thing. But it's also, you can see in an image like this, how much is being communicated instantly. And if you know the game, you'll recognize this scene from the game, and you'll recognize the dependency of the main character and the sun. This is a big part of the gameplay. This is one of the early bosses. There's the whole rage thing is expressed instantly, but also the sort of the transcendence of the mythos and all that. This took a lot of work. This isn't just, hey, I made a cool drawing. This is strategy and personality and emotion and the right illustrator and all these things brought together in one image that you can instantly digest. And this is another great image. I think it's Halo 4. And what often happens is that when developers make their own key visuals, we often communicate to the people who already like the game. So we're basically saying the things that the people who already like the game like. And often we only test it on those, so we kind of get confirmed that this is a really cool visual. Problem is, if we want to hit a larger audience, we have to engage a larger emotional spectrum. And something like this Halo 4 image, which communicates that whole choir-like music, the transcendence again, the combat, the futuristic setting, and so on, the fact that it's a single-player shooter, at least in the offing, all of this communicated instantly. And again, it's not just an image that's been made randomly. And then, of course, they stand out in the market. I mean, it's no secret to any of you that there's hundreds of games coming every day or every week. So you have to make something new. It has to have visually something that we haven't seen before. And we've seen Cyberpunk 1 million times, so let's give him an electric collar. I think that's the only reason I can think of to put an electric heater around his neck, is that we haven't seen it before. And we can remember it. It stands out. Of course, with the kind of media push these guys are putting in, it'll stand out anyway, but the point stands. The next thing, of course, it does is that having a brand gives you consistency across all touch points. And this is a really crucial thing, right? It has to be recognizable no matter where you see it, and whether it's a vertical banner or horizontal banner, or it's something at a conference, or it's a box, or it's a pillar, or whatever. And again, we often get this one, which is, we can't have a character on our brand because you can choose your own character. And I don't think that matters, because that's not the point. The point is that what the key illustration does is it shows you the emotion you're going to experience in this game. And the character that you put on the key visual is embodying that, is your access point to that emotion. In this case, rage, horror, mystery. You can see the buildings inside the body, and so on. And of course, the Gothic choice of font. And this is again what the investors know, and what the publishers know when you're pitching them. It's that, can this game become a space in the market that we own? Anybody feel like making a Hitman game these days? You know, that's kind of a tough space to get into, because IO Interactive kind of own the Hitman space. They have the name, they have the brand, they've built it over 20 years and so on. If you can do that, or if you can even promise an investor that that's what you're aiming for, then for the investor, this gamble, because let's face it, investing is a gamble, suddenly has a bigger payout if it works. It may not make the chance of it working in the beginning that much bigger, although an impactful brand definitely will, but the IP, suddenly the sky's the limit. So it's actually, you become a much better bet. If you don't have these elements, then you're competing on features with everybody else. And features mean you're a commodity, like baked beans or something like that. And you don't want to do that. You want to be different. You want to be unique. So finishing off, how do we do this usually? Well, the development process is not complex, but what it does demand is skilled specialists. So the way that we do it is that we start with a workshop where we bring in the team, and we like to bring in as much of the team as possible. Often the management will tell us, hey, we just want the management to come because the other guys are busy working. And our experience is that that is a spectacularly bad idea, because the team is the game. And if the team doesn't think it's a good idea to rebrand or build a brand, it's not going to happen. Or if it does, you're starting to rip the company in half, basically. Because the team is extremely invested in the creative vision that they have had for the last, I don't know, 24 months, 48 months, 10 years, whatever. So when you suddenly tell them, we're going to make a poster that your hardcore friends might not even like, but the bigger market might like, you're going to get this reaction. Either that, or you're just going to hear a slamming door. So bringing in the whole team and making them part of the process, also to figure out what is the original artistic intent in the team, is just super, super important. So if you're doing this yourself, do it with the team, at least at the start, at least until they feel safe that they've put their stuff into it, and then you can keep them updated. Because obviously the whole team doesn't have time for this. They do have a game to make or maintain or whatever. Then we define the brand. So then what we do is we have a brand strategist, and we have a creative director, and they start working out the positioning and the tone of voice. How is this? How are the things said? How is it communicating? We did it for a World War II game where the tone of voice was, this trench warrior who took no bullshit, but he was fair, and we could write all the copy based on that. And after that, the community could communicate like that, and so on. So terms like tone of voice are incredibly important. Once you have that, you can start prototyping the brand and the logo. And our recommendation is that you view the brand in the same way that you would view a game. So you prototype it and you test it. The idea that we'll make it and then we'll put it up and it'll work, it doesn't work for games, it doesn't work for brands. So with that one, for example, we built or developed 10 different key visuals in a rough form, and then we decided internally with the team which 3 were we going to go out and test. And that one down there was the one we hated the most, but we still took it because we could see it had some. Unfortunately, that was the one all the users liked. So, you know, you just don't know. And once you've chosen it, then you can start rendering it out. And that's the expense involved in that depends on, do you need it in a 5x5 poster, 5 meters by 5 meters poster for E3, or do you basically just need it like that? That's going to decide how expensive it is. In the end, you make a brand manual and maybe an IP Bible, and what that enables you to do is to give it to subcontractors who are making banners for you or whatever, and it just says, use this font, use these rules, it should look like this, but then they can put their own imagery into it. And that brings us back to this, which is that when you finish, you should have something that the entire team says, yes, this is exactly what we meant, but that a first-time user will react to. When we came into Heroes and Generals, this was how their ads looked, and as you can see, it's about war. It can be tough to see that it's the same game because they actually have different fonts and so on. And when we were finished with it, it looked like this. And we had a brand manual. We knew exactly what the fonts were. We were communicating that it was a massively multiplayer game. It was World War II. There were 3 factions. There was air war and ground war and so on. And suddenly it had franchise possibility because now you can exchange the World War II with Vietnam or on the moon or whatever you want. So finishing up, there's the key to sustainability, or one of the keys to sustainability, because I know there are more, is that you do need a core IP, and you need, if you can, to get it in quickly. It's never too late to develop a brand, but it can be too late to develop an IP. But if you get one, and if you manage it, then you're actually owning long-term value. And owning long-term value is pretty self-explanatory. This is something the fans like because they can feel safe that their investment of time will continue. And they can also look at this and say, wow, this looks like a quality package. I think I'll give it a shot. So what we think is that using IP and brand development is basically a mission-critical game changer. And that in fact, even though we didn't know it, our artistic intent is actually the core of our business because that is what we're selling. Thank you. I think we have time for questions if there are any. There's one over there.
Hi, great talk. So you say most of the time the sequel is more important than the actual, make more money than the first game. You say the sequel make more money than the first game, and building an IP is important. So assuming I'm doing the work to create a great IP, would you say it's still better to release a non-good game with this IP, to put it out there and have people having it, and banking on making a really great sequel, assuming I can make a second game? Or should I not do that and try really to make a really first good game? Making my first game
as I understood the question, you're asking, will a bad game become better if it has an IP?
Yes.
No. That's what I mean. And that's how, that part is tricky. A bad game will not become better because you have a knight that looks really cool and that you can own legally. But for an investor, it becomes a better investment because the chance of having if it has success, then you can own it. Then you can build sequels of it. So any investor is taking a gamble on you building a good game. That does not go away because you have an IP. But the potential payout for the investor becomes much bigger because if you have success, it can actually be owned and protected legally and spawn sequels and eventually become an entertainment property. I'm not saying it has to, but that potential is suddenly there, and it wasn't there if you didn't have an IP. Does that? It's kind of tough because it's absolutely true. The IP is not going to increase your chance of success. It may increase your chance of investment. I think it will do that. And ultimately, it gives you a bigger potential. No more questions? Thank you. Thank you for coming.